Is this on? Oh, it's on. Okay. Hello and welcome. This event is Marine Protected Areas as Ocean Nature-Based Solutions to Mitigate and Address Climate Change. And now I'd like to welcome to the podium Deputy Assistant Secretary Millette Mesfin of the Bureau of Oceans, Environment, and Science at the U.S. State Department. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you today here on Oceans Day at the U.S. Center. Today we will hear from a panel of committed experts and leaders on how protecting and conserving healthy, vibrant ocean ecosystems is critical to combating the climate crisis. The ocean bears the brunt of climate change, but the ocean can also help us tackle climate challenges if we take advantage of its many benefits. Healthy coastal and marine ecosystems are key to climate adaptation and resilience, particularly for frontline communities. They protect communities from increasing storms, support rich biodiversity, including fisheries, and can mitigate the impacts of carbon emissions. That's why protecting these ecosystems through tools like Marine Protected Areas, or MPAs, is so important. We know that MPAs work. Research tells us that they result in more and bigger fish, less stress on ecosystems and species from climate impacts, and positive economic impacts for local communities. And MPAs that protect coastal blue carbon ecosystems like salt marshes, seagrass beds, and mangroves have the potential to contribute significantly to carbon sequestration. The United States is committed to working with countries around the world to meet the goal of protecting or conserving 30% of our global ocean by 2030, or 30 by 30. Including through marine protected areas. The global community must act together if we are to ensure that these ecosystems continue to thrive. The ocean, as vast as it is one global system. Many species migrate between habitats with no regard for national borders. And what happens in one part of the ocean can alter the entire system and ultimately affect us all. We have seen what working together can accomplish. Last year, the Eastern Tropical Pacific Marine Corridor, or CMAR, became the first connected multinational corridor to protect wildlife across 500,000 square kilometers of highly productive and biologically diverse ocean waters. The corridor spans waters of 4 countries, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, and Panama. And in support of CMAR's objectives, the United States signed a memorandum of agreement or understanding with CMAR countries to work together to strengthen marine governance, maritime security, and marine conservation finance in the CMAR corridor. It is an excellent example of how countries can partner together to secure, protect, and conserve shared marine ecosystems and migratory species that call them home. And we luckily get to have somebody today to tell us more about CMAR. This September, the United States signed the High Seas Treaty, which for the first time creates a coordinated and cross-sectoral approach to establishing MPAs in areas beyond our national jurisdiction. More than 80 countries and counting have signed the agreement. And last year, the State Department launched the Ocean Conservation Pledge, which encourages countries to join us in committing to conserve or protect 30% of ocean waters under their national jurisdiction by 2030, which will be a critical step to achieving the global 30 by 30 goal. To date, 18 countries have signed this pledge. In the United States, Dr. Spinrad, who will be with us later today, and his team at NOAA are leading the charge to meet this goal at home. Currently, MPAs cover 26% of U.S. waters. Around the globe, dedicated counterparts are also taking action to protect the ocean ecosystem, and we will hear from some of them shortly. One could use that old expression that we are fighting the good fight, but of course it's not a fight at all. This is an exercise in cooperation among governments, communities, and other stakeholders. That's the only way that we will succeed. I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists about how to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Deputy Assistant Secretary Mesfin, for starting us off today and setting the stage for our discussion. Today is being hosted by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the International Partnership for Marine Protected Areas, Biodiversity and Climate Change. The international partnership was an outcome of COP25, and it was formed by the countries of Chile, France, United Kingdom, Costa Rica, and the United States to provide leadership in the role that marine protected areas play in addressing climate change, both through mitigation, resilience, and adaptation. Today we're going to hear some case studies on what the partnership has been working on and how we collaborate to advance marine protected areas as a tool to help achieve our nationally declared contributions, as well as to inform national adaptation plans. The ocean, and MPAs in particular, are important to helping us reach our global goals. As scientists have told us, approximately 20% of our goals, achieving our goals, is going to come through ocean action. The United States, as Deputy Secretary Messon has mentioned, has pledged to protect 30% of our waters by 2030 through America the Beautiful. This is one of the actions we're taking to help advance marine protected areas and their role in achieving our climate goals. So I'm going to introduce the panelists and first have them come up here and join me on the stage. So all three panelists, you can go ahead and join me, and then I'll introduce them one by one to present on what their countries are working on in terms of MPAs. Then we'll go into a panel discussion. And if time allows, we will then open up that panel discussion to the audience for you to be able to ask questions. And we will conclude with remarks from Dr. Spinrad. So, to move on, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Gideon Henderson. He's the Chief Scientist for the Department for Environment, Food, and Rural Affairs with the United Kingdom. Professor Gideon.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and welcome to the audience. I'd like to start off by saying what a proud member the UK is of the international partnership, and I'd like to thank the UK's Joint Nature Conservatory Council for leading our national involvement in this international partnership. Now, increasing funding for MPA management depends, I think, on understanding two things. Understanding the risk that we get in the oceans from climate change and the benefits that MPAs bring. And that's the sort of central theme of what it is that will drive funding into this area. Public attachment, societal attachment to the oceans is strong, and particularly to ocean biology. And there's an instinctive support in publics for the ocean. But MPAs can get in the way of human activity and sometimes livelihoods, fishing and coastal communities. And we need to recognise that this often leads to societal challenges around MPAs and think about them in a broad context, not just instinctively as something to do with protecting the environment. In the context of this complexity, as we try and understand, measure and monitor the impacts and understand the best regulation to uphold and make sure that MPAs are working, it is disappointing that of all the SDGs, SDG number 14, Life Below Water, this is the SDG that receives the least amount of long-term funding. It is estimated that about $175 billion per year is needed to achieve SDG 14 by 2030. But here, as we enter the really critical years of the UN Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, we're still a long way short of that level of funding. So drawing in funding to understand those risks and the benefits is really important. A couple of examples that I'll deal with very quickly about why MPAs can be so valuable and areas where we can bring science to bear to quantify some of the benefits. And these, I'm sure, will be familiar to many of you. First of all, surface coral reefs, which can reduce wave energy by as much as 97%, serving as natural flood defences to protect people from storm surges and waves and drive significant local income. These reefs also represent a valuable resource for genetics in a way that we simply haven't begun to explore yet, with potential for significant future benefit to humankind. These areas are under significant climate stress, and if we're going to adapt to them adequately, we need strong MPAs that recognise the areas that are most resilient to change and which need our protection. Mangroves, a second poster child often for MPAs, can reduce flood erosion at a fifth of the cost of hard substrate conventional infrastructure, and reduce annual flooding already to more than 18 million people globally. They also store carbon extremely effectively, so they're both an adaptation and mitigation challenge, representing about 4 times the carbon storage relative to terrestrial forests, and an area where restoration and protection of what we already have can lead to about 9 billion tonnes of emissions avoided. The UK supports activity to protect and enhance both of those environments and others through our MPA work, including through the research and development that we fund through my office. UK supports work on coral reefs and mangroves throughout the world, principally through the Blue Planet Fund, our UK aid programme, and that includes Global Fund for Coral Reef, where the UK has invested 33 million into this world-leading sustainable finance mechanism operating now all over the world, and estimated to save $82 billion in damages to those environments. We also invest in several other programs related to corals and mangroves, including the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, or ORA. This program has funded development, as an example, of the first sustainable financing plan in the East Mangaliso Wetland Park World Heritage Site in South Africa. And this project is specifically designed to understand, through scientific monitoring and understanding, coupled to societal understanding, how we can build a financial framework that increases ecological and social resilience. We have similar programs looking at mangroves, particularly in Madagascar and Indonesia, within the Blue Forest Initiative that I won't go into in detail here. In our own domestic waters in the UK, this year we announced our first 3 highly protected marine areas, where we've looked after the benefits of specific areas of our sea with more restrictive MPLA rules. And the data from these areas, I'm confident, will really clearly demonstrate the benefits that we get from fuller protection of some of our MPAs for our communities, as well as for biodiversity and for carbon storage. So some concluding remarks in my statement here, that if we're to recognise that there are multiple stakeholders, that's critical for driving funding into MPAs. We also need to recognise that each MPLA is different and place-based. We need to think about the protections required for each, quantify the benefits and the costs. And with those actions, we can mobilise funding for monitoring of action, as well as for the monitoring of the impacts, using the science to help us to bring science to bear to protect our ocean. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Henderson. Our next panelist is Florent Marat. He is the Deputy Director for European and International Relations with the French Biodiversity Agency.
Thank you, Maria. Hello, everyone, dear delegates, dear colleagues, dear attendees. I'm Florent Merle, representative of the French Biodiversity Agency, which is a public institution in charge of restoration, protection, and conservation of biodiversity in France. And we are pleased to contribute within this really important partnership, the international partnership on MPAs, biodiversity and climate change. At the French Biodiversity Agency, we are convinced that MPAs are really important to expand, restore, and protect blue carbon. And we have a relevant case study I wanted to present today. It's a so-called reinforce program, which means reinforcement of carbon sinks in the marine environment. And it takes place in the waters of island of Corsica in Mediterranean. So as you know, Posidonia oceanica is a Mediterranean marine plant that plays a major role in carbon fixation and sequestration. It covers more than 2 million hectares and stores up to 10 times more carbon than tropical forest soils. 1 centimeter square of Posidonia releases 14 liters of oxygen a day. That's why Posidonia is often referred to be the lung of the Mediterranean. It is also a powerful tool regarding water treatment and protection against erosion. And of course, it is an important habitat for Mediterranean species. However, its growth is very slow, only 1 meter per century without any disturbance. Human activities such as anchoring are disturbing the slow growth process and even destroying existing seagrass. This led us to the Reinforce program, which is a 3-year project that will develop a strategy by reinforcing carbon sinks in the marine environment. In this strategy, we focus on Posidonia seagrass restoration by establishing an experimental demonstration plan. So what about this project? The project is really to carry out Posidonia experimental restoration techniques in the Bay of Santa Manza within the Strait of Bonifacio Nature Reserve, located in the south of the island of Corsica. In Corsica, Posidonia meadows account for 60% of the seabed between 0 and 40 meters depth. Several hectares of Posidonia seagrass meadows have been destroyed over the past decades, mainly within the busy Bay of Santa Manza. For only 1 year, between 2019 and 2020, an estimated loss of 8 hectares was observed. So concretely, how does it work? We have 4 scientific teams involved in the project, one from France, one from Italy, and another one from Spain, associated with the International School for Scientific Diving. And we have 2 phases. During the first one, strategy for strengthening carbon sink in the marine environment and the restoration of Posidonia seagrass have been discussed. And then in the second phase, the project teams conducted experiments. 4 techniques for transplanting Posidonia seagrass were tested to evaluate the most effective one. All techniques were tested in areas made up by depth math, resulting from the degradation of seagrass meadow due to anchoring. The cuttings were taken and then replanted in the damaged areas by the 4 teams, and a total of 12,500 Posidonia grass cuttings were transplanted during those expeditions. And what about now? So for 2 years, the project teams have been monitoring the transplants and the natural recolonization, and we are still ongoing for the analysis and research, but we are proud to say that the first results indicated an encouraging rate of survival of the cutting. Therefore, the pilot site will provide valuable insights that can be extrapolated to the entire French Mediterranean coastline and whatever in the region. Thank you again for the international partnership for MPA and Biodiversity and Climate Change. We provide a platform to share results and promote them and share successful projects offered by innovation techniques. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Deputy Director Merrill. And now our next panelist is Jose Julio Casas, and he is with CMAR. And Julio is going to be presenting in Spanish, and he has the slides in English, so you can follow along. Julio?
Hello, thank you, Maria and Noah, for this invitation. So I will speak Spanish. I'm sorry. Sure. Bueno, el corredor marino del Pacífico Este Tropical es una iniciativa voluntaria, no vinculante, lo que significa que los países no tienen obligaciones propiamente establecidas por este tipo de relación, lo que lo convierte en una iniciativa mucho más interesante. Es una zona que está conformada por una gran cantidad de áreas marinas protegidas que entre ellas buscan la protección y la conservación de esa gran biodiversidad que tenemos en el Pacífico Oriental Tropical. Actualmente el corredor está formado por 10 áreas marinas protegidas que se reconocen como las áreas núcleo de ese corredor y que representan centros o hotspots de biodiversidad dentro de toda la estructura del corredor. Dentro de los 4 países que lo conforman, se reparten estas 10 islas. Tenemos 2 en Ecuador, Galápagos y Hermandad. Tenemos 2 en Costa Rica, Isla Coco y Bicentenario. Tenemos 4 en Colombia, Gorgona, Malpelo, Yurupari y Colinas y Lomas. Y tenemos 2 áreas protegidas núcleo en Panamá, que son la isla de Coiba y la cordillera de Coiba, que son 2 áreas separadas. El corredor busca promover la conservación y el uso sostenible, el uso responsable de los recursos tanto marinos como costeros. Y esto lo hace a partir del trabajo en conjunto, del trabajo en equipo con el resto de los países o con todos los países que lo conforman, estableciendo así estrategias regionales. Esta es la figura actual del corredor. Tenemos las 10 áreas protegidas. Es un área cubierta por una gran cantidad de una gran cantidad de áreas marinas protegidas que están casi completamente unidas entre ellas, lo que permite la protección y la conservación de los recursos entre los espacios que esta cubre. Se encarga de proteger especies altamente migratorias, especies que se mueven entre toda la zona y que incluso van mucho más allá del mapa del CEMAR. Y para trabajar en temas de cambio climático, promueve una serie de actividades que intentan buscar tanto la adaptación como la mitigación del cambio climático. No solamente en estas áreas, sino con las comunidades que trabajan o que aprovechan estos recursos. Muy importante, utiliza la información científica para la toma de decisiones. A partir de allí fue que se aumentó el número de áreas núcleo iniciales de 5 a 10 áreas como las tenemos al día de hoy. Y es muy importante también que dentro de estos países se ayuda a promover la iniciativa del 30 por 30 y de hecho a día de hoy casi todos los países tienen ya el 30% cubierto o protegido con algún nivel en su superficie marina. Además, al ser regional, el corredor promueve el trabajo de coordinación entre todos los países que lo conforman, incluso países más allá de los que están dentro del corredor, y asimismo busca que todos los actores, incluidos los cooperantes, los socios, los donantes, se sienten a trabajar de una manera compenetrada, de una manera estratégica para alcanzar los objetivos que se tienen dentro de esta iniciativa. Busca también que esas iniciativas sean complementarias entre ellas, que puedan ayudarse y que se pueda dar seguimiento entre una y otra, y evita que haya duplicación de los esfuerzos y más bien lo que intenta es que haya una manera, que sea una forma de potenciar los recursos que se tienen en la actualidad. Para ir cerrando, definitivamente que el CEMAR está comprometido con la protección, el cuidado de la biodiversidad en esta zona que es altamente diversa, busca la protección de procesos ecológicamente importantes que permitan a todos los organismos que están en la zona mantener la salud ecológica del sistema enfocado en especies altamente migratorias. Definitivamente que en el CEMAR se reconoce el impacto del cambio climático y la necesidad de trabajar para poder mitigar esta amenaza global, y a partir de esto ejecuta una gran cantidad de actividades, arrancando desde los guardaparques para asegurar que se pueda combatir esta problemática global. Luego se promueve la conectividad entre estas áreas, lo que va a permitir que entre muchos países podamos asegurar la protección de esas especies que se mueven, conectando no solamente el área del CEMAR, sino mucho más allá, hacia el norte y hacia el sur. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Julio, for that presentation. It's very interesting to hear about international networks and how they protect transboundary species. We're now going to go into a panel, and I'll ask a couple of questions, and then we will open it up for questions from the audience. I'm going to start with you, Professor Henderson, and finance, very prime topic right now, and financing MPA networks. What is the role of ocean science in scaling sustainable finance for MPAs?
So I'd like to answer that by being quite scientific, quite numerical about it. I'm going to give you a few reasons why people might fund, and then some of the things that we need the funding for and which might drive that funding. And the reasons that there are at least three groups of actors who might fund MPAs. They're governments because they have a regulatory requirement and an obligation to do so. There are foundations who might want to do so for moral good or for their charitable purpose. And there is business because they want to secure their long-term supply chains, have a social license to operate, and also sometimes because regulation requires them to operate that way. So we have to think about those different funders and what might draw them into funding MPAs. And I do think there are 5 categories of the type of measurement that we need, which will attract different groups of different types of funders there. One of the things we need to do is be able to enforce regulation. So we need the science that will help us to enforce regulation. There's some great work using Earth observation to track fishing boats that might have turned off their tracking. So we can use science to assess the actual impact in terms of action around an MPA. We also need the science to understand the ecosystem and the carbon storage in that setting and how humans interact with it. We need the science to understand the carbon and biodiversity benefits, and that's often an area which can draw in foundation and activity from companies. And we need understanding that will help us to think about the long-term implications of setting up an MPA. How will MPAs respond to future climate change? Both their mitigation potential because of blue carbon and their adaptation, are they going to be robust to future climate change? So there's several reasons why we should be doing it, and I think we have to think about which ones of those will attract different types of funding.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. And when you're talking about blue carbon and MPA's potential to store blue carbon, Florent, your case study on eelgrass and the amount of carbon that can be sequestered by eelgrass is very impressive, or I should say seagrass. Can you please share with us your thoughts on what are the next steps for the international community to protect and restore this type of habitat to help reach our global climate change goals?
Thank you, Maria, for the question. I will focus again on seagrass and to demonstrate how we can, from an international level to very local level, work through an initiative we have set up at the Mediterranean level. So I would like to highlight this initiative, which is called the Mediterranean Posidonia Network. It's a regional project to be hosted by my agency, the French Biodiversity Agency, for the whole Mediterranean region. So as I mentioned earlier, Posidonia Oceania is really important, for us as important as coral reef, as mangrove, or even rainforest. But however, the knowledge for Posidonia is still limited, and the current threat, like the onshoring of boats, coastal artificialization, or beach management, have led to a 10% decline in the meadow in France, and up to 30% internationally. As I mentioned, the Posidonia meadow covers more than 2 million hectares in the Mediterranean, and 60% are located outside MPAs. To protect it, it's already protected at international and European level by the Berne Convention and the Barcelona Convention, but these protections are still not enough in the field. The French Biodiversity Agency has made the protection of Posidonia one of its top priorities. Its pilot technical expertise and financial support to activities aims to protect the Posidonia with different actions such as knowledge, which is essential for understanding and acting accordingly, management action, such as support for implementation of ecological anchoring or guidelines for vessels, support for enforcement, awareness raising, innovation action, such as the one I have presented earlier for transplantation of Posidonia. And we decided with other partners in Mediterranean to step up awareness of Posidonia, for the protection of Posidonia, and with the government of Balearic Islands, with the Regional Activity Center for Specially Protected Areas of the Barcelona Convention, we decided to create the Mediterranean Posidonia Network at the end of 2019. This Posidonia community is currently a network where stakeholders from all over the Mediterranean concerned by the Posidonia protection can meet, exchange, and work together at the national level and local level, because scientists are represented there, also international organizations, and above all professional, such as yachting operators or marinas are there. And we are proud to have so far 15 countries represented there and 50 members. And in practical terms, the one main issue is really to raise awareness of the importance of preservation of Posidonia among decision makers at the national level and also at the local level. And we encourage them to take the most appropriate action. But MPAs has other guidelines, other targets, 7, and I will present it. So it's really to protect 100% of Posidonia, 100% of Posidonia meadows by 2030. Then develop a funding mechanism by 2030 to finance priority action sites. So we target 1,000 sites. Also develop low impact anchorages by 2030. Implement European regulations banning large vessels from the meadow in countries concerned by this issue. Ban illegal trawling as well, and improve water quality. Complete mapping in South countries, which is super important for knowledge, and raise civil society awareness to ensure that seagrass are recognized at the same level of coral reef or mangroves. And last but not least, contribute to the 30-30 objective of the Kunming-Montreal target and the Barcelona Convention. So that was a concrete example of what can be done at the regional scale to save seagrass, to raise awareness, and to tackle the effect of climate change. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. That's really showing leadership of expanding what our traditional thoughts are for marine protected areas, expanding beyond the corals to seagrass, which is not often recognized as a valuable habitat, but it is, as you mentioned. It supports biodiversity. It helps sequester carbon. It's a very rich habitat. And thank you for your leadership and working across nations to protect it. And going on that theme, Julio, and I forgot to mention he's the pro tempore director for CMAR, to expand upon that network idea. I think this is a new idea that's very intriguing of working across countries to look at protecting transboundary migratory species as part of MPAs. So what can you share with us on how the work you're doing can help advance our global climate change goals? And Julio has an interpreter here who can help with answering our questions as well as any questions we may have from the audience. So to you, Julio.
First, I want to thank my dear friend, Dr. Hannah Spalding, for the translation. I will be fast, okay? So I think, para que las áreas marinas protegidas puedan ayudar al proceso, a la lucha contra el cambio climático y a todas las amenazas, no podemos esperar que lo logren solo con una designación. Tenemos que asegurarnos que al designar una o varias áreas marinas protegidas, la acción de esas zonas sea efectiva, sea real, para que ayude a mantener indicadores biológicos y ecológicos que aseguren que el océano pueda jugar su rol. El océano debe ser saludable para poder jugar su rol en la acción climática, para protegernos de todo lo que representa no solo el aumento de la temperatura, sino todo lo que se da con el problema del cambio climático en la actualidad.
Jose Julio was saying that for MPAs to be climate ready, it's important not just to focus on designation of sites, but also to make sure that they are effective and that they're very clear indicators for biological and ecological indicators to be able to respond to climate action. And so how that, eso cómo se relaciona entonces con la transboundary, ¿no? Con el tema de que son varias áreas.
Y luego asegurarse que estos procesos sean de acuerdo a lo que establece la naturaleza, ya que las especies altamente migratorias no reconocen los límites políticos o geopolíticos establecidos por nosotros y se mueven más bien de acuerdo a factores ambientales en la zona en la que están. Y allí me voy a lo último que quiero mencionar, y es que al ser especies altamente migratorias que conectan diferentes zonas y diferentes países, el trabajo en equipo entre todos los actores es sumamente importante. Y cuando hablo de todos los actores, no hablo solamente de gobiernos, sino de los gobiernos de los países de estas zonas, sino todo el resto de los actores, los usuarios, los donantes, los otros gobiernos que también buscan la protección de estas regiones.
¿Puedo decir un poquito de la secretaría que se está tratando de formar? ¿Quieres comentar? Ajá, sí. Okay. And so obviously migratory species don't recognize political boundaries. And so this is one of the main values of CMAR is the ability to cross ecological boundaries, focusing on those. And so the importance is not only working with governments, but also working with all end users and partners. And I'm going to take the liberty to add something which he had presented on a couple of days ago, which is the political structure of making sure that these countries work together. And so Jose Julio has been leading the establishment of a permanent secretariat for CMAR, which would create a formal structure for these countries to work together and be able to access additional funding, although they've already been highly successful at considering funding. But so formalizing the structure is a really important part of this as well, to ensure that these ecological boundaries are supported as well as political partnerships and collaboration.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we have about 1 minute for a question from the audience. Ooh, and a hand went up right away.
Do you need one of these?
My name is Kelly Moneymaker. I'm from Fairbanks, Alaska, and I work for Drum Song Films. We are raising Indigenous voices for food sovereignty and Indigenous rights. And one of our big problems is we are losing our lands and our wetlands, especially due to the melt of permafrost. But what I want to know is I love the coordination amongst boundaries, right? Because we have cousins across in Russia, from the Chukchis to the St. Lawrence Island, Yupik, over to Greenland, and we're having issues with channels and stuff. But what I want to know is, when you're collecting that science, that scientific data, are you also considering working alongside the Indigenous for the Indigenous sciences in partnership, equal partnership? Because they are the stewards of the land, air, and sea. And this is something we are focusing on in Alaska. I also work with International Arctic Research Center, and it has gone from partnerships to Indigenous-led science. So.
Okay, yeah, we're at time, so if we can do a really quick answer.
It's critically important. We've probably lost track of which microphone's which now. It's critically important, and I said in my opening remarks how important it is to think about the society in the place that you're intervening. So I would perhaps just say that it's not just Indigenous people in the way that we sometimes think of it. It's whoever is operating, whichever society is operating in that space and is involved in that landscape and that marinescape. We need to think of their views, their science, their ways of viewing it, and their livelihoods when we're thinking about how to interact with them.
Well, thank you very much to our panelists. Sorry, we're at time. I'd like to introduce our closing speaker. He is my leader and the director of, the assistant administrator for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Dr. Spinrad.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you to the panelists as well. I was excited to have the opportunity to come here and talk. I came in as I was faced with what I'm sure you were putting up with for an hour, a musical accompaniment from the room next door, which led me to believe that I was actually walking in on a discussion on MPAs known as the music protection areas, but quickly was disabused of that by listening to some of the very specific comments that you brought up. And noted the close alignment with the theme of today's COP discussion on nature, land use, and oceans, and it's important to reflect the vital role that the oceans play, obviously, in mitigating and addressing climate change. I apologize that, unfortunately, I had to miss the first part of the discussion today due to a last-minute conflicting event where I was actually talking about some of the issues we're doing in green shipping, and couldn't help but notice the intimate relationship, obviously, between activities in green shipping and the establishment and management of marine protected areas. And so those two concepts, when you think about it, and what you all have focused on for the last hour here, are a testament to all of the collaboration that's going on across the COP community here, but especially among those folks who are here to particularly pay attention to the issues of oceans as applied to solutions in the climate arena. I was also glad to be able to hear some of the comments and note the extraordinary innovation that is part of the marine protected area dynamic. I was honored 20 plus years ago to run NOAA's National Ocean Service, which has a lot of leadership responsibilities for the Sanctuaries Program, for the National Estuarine Research Reserves, and found it remarkable, just in listening to the comments, how innovation has expanded our thinking with respect to MPAs from what gets protected, whether we're talking about seagrasses, for example, as part of the protected portfolio, as well as innovation in conservation approaches as reflected in CMAR, where we're looking at transboundary approaches, a concept which, when you think about it, is pretty mind-blowing in terms of how we can effectively protect and conserve the oceans. So has been exemplified through this discussion. Marine protected areas really are critical ocean-based, nature-based solutions that can effectively contribute to both climate mitigation and adaptation. At NOAA, we are leading high-impact scientific advances to protect and restore blue carbon habitats, explore options for carbon sequestration, and enhance ecological processes within MPAs. For example, last month we released the Blue Carbon in Marine Protected Areas Part 3, an evaluation of sedimentary carbon stocks in Greater Farallones and Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuaries. So well-established national marine sanctuaries, which we are now looking at in terms of their blue carbon storage capacity. The publication builds on the United Kingdom's work on carbon stores and offshore sediment and is part of the Blue Carbon in Marine Protected Areas series to inform and guide MPA managers in the assessment, protection, and management of blue carbon habitats and processes. This third manuscript in the series illustrates the value of seafloor sediments, the largest non-fossil pool of organic carbon on the planet. Muddy substrates in the area contain substantial amounts of stored carbon, approximately 9 million metric tons, which is equivalent to the amount of carbon dioxide created from the burning of 3.5 billion gallons of gasoline, or driving over 7 million cars for a year, so not insignificant. It expands the scientific understanding of non-fossil organic carbon in the marine environment and how it can contribute to achieving global carbon dioxide mitigation goals. I'd also like to highlight the NOAA Blue Carbon Inventory Project, which we use to support international capacity building and technical assistance for countries to include coastal wetlands in their national greenhouse gas inventories. Just blows my mind that we have to convince people that we should be doing that in the first place. And also develop management strategies that reflect their value in coastal resilience and climate mitigation. The project has already implemented multiple successful capacity building workshops, both for management and the inventory in both Costa Rica and Ghana. The project works closely with the Environmental Protection Agency, Sylvestrum Climate Associates, the Ocean Foundation, the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, and the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center to deliver data and technical expertise to our partners. Let me talk briefly about the U.S. commitment to international partnerships and technical exchange. As has been emphasized throughout today's event, we can't do this alone. The United States is committed to enhanced international collaboration to better understand MPAs as climate solutions and to improve MPA management. The United States and the United Arab Emirates are collaborating to respond to impacts of a changing ocean environment that is killing coral reefs, an ecosystem and economic driver. The UAE understands the urgent situation in the Florida Keys based on their work to protect coral reefs in the UAE. Over the last 3 years, the government of the United Arab Emirates has granted $3.5 million towards major coral reef restoration in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary to restore and preserve 100 miles of coral reef. Once a thriving ecosystem, only 2% of the area's reef had survived hurricanes, aquatic health issues, and human interaction. Just a few months ago, when rising ocean temperatures, which were characterized in the press as hot tub temperatures, these are hot ocean temperatures, caused a coral bleaching crisis in the Florida Keys. The UAE stepped up at that point and worked with partners on the ground to rescue critical species. The project reflects a shared commitment by the UAE and the U.S. to protect nature and ensure a sustainable future, and underscores the close ties between the people of both countries. Throughout the International Partnership on MPAs, Biodiversity and Climate Change, We're also able to provide technical exchanges with other members. Under that partnership, we share information with the MPA community of practice through case studies, and today, I'm excited to announce the release of 3 new case studies that focus on MPA's role in long-term carbon storage and restoring habitats that sequester carbon. These include the U.S. case study on kelp restoration to mitigate and address climate change impacts, a French case study on restoration of seagrass meadows, and the United Kingdom case study on climate-smart MPAs. MPAs can provide powerful ocean nature-based solutions, and well-managed and thoughtfully designated MPAs can have dramatic impacts that go well beyond their geographical boundaries by restoring and conserving ecosystems, protecting valuable carbon stores in the seabed, enhancing carbon sequestration in healthy wetlands, seagrass, and mangrove habitats. MPAs can be seriously useful tools for mitigating and adapting to climate impacts. NOAA looks forward to continued collaborations at the global, national, and local levels, and together we can realize the full potential of MPAs. Thank you very much.
To our amazing panelists. And if the panelists could stand on stage for a group photo, that would be great. Group photo time. That means you, Dr. Spinrad. One more round of applause for our amazing panel.